Welcome to In Production, conversations on the research and development of time-based artworks. Hosted by MPAC's engineering and curatorial staff, we talk to artists, technicians, curators, scholars, and makers associated with the production of new work here at the Curtis R. Priam Experimental Media and Performing Arts Center on the campus of Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. Through interdisciplinary exchange, this podcast series provides insight into the creative and technical act of producing artistic works by those who work backstage and behind the camera. Hello, welcome to an episode of MPAC's In Production podcast. My name is Amadeus Julian Regucera, and I'm the music curator here at MPAC. And today we have a roundtable with our MPAC curators to discuss our fall 2024 season. I'm joined here by time-based visual arts curator Katherine Adams and our curator-in-residence for dance and theater, Tara Willis. So welcome both of you. And maybe just jump in here. We have a really exciting fall season coming up. We just announced it. And I just wanted to ask the both of you, where did you start with the planning for this season? And what was the first thing you knew for sure when you were thinking about which artists and which projects to bring? Maybe Katherine, you want to start?
Yeah, sure. Thanks. So for me, there were a couple of specific projects, some key commissions. One is the work by Marina Rosenfeld that we'll be showing in November called Moo. And then a commission with a filmmaker and writer Bassem Saad and Sanya Grosdanek. So those were a couple of key projects for me that we've been building up to for a little while. Marina had started working on that project with us last year, and it's kind of an extension of her work with dub plates, looking at the dub plate as this kind of scene where sound is kind of originating as inscription. She also thinks a lot about turntables, so sort of the way that, performers can kind of intervene in recordings of music. So that's just one example of a project, but those two were kind of key. And then one other kind of key starting point for me was the interest in thinking a little bit more in series. So you'll see that within my program, there's two series that kind of collect a couple of groups of programs just to allow people to sort of follow through a thread of inquiry alongside some of the events. So Dana Michelle's Mike, which is this experimental performance about labor, became like a larger set of programs called Decommission, which is kind of looking at artists' attempts to kind of offer alternative economies or alternative kind of, let's say, infrastructures for doing work, for thinking about value. And so that was the starting place for me. And Tara, it would be great to hear also where your thinking started.
Yeah, thanks, Katherine. Yeah, I have a similar relationship for this season to series, that kind of through line or framing concept, or allowing a particular work or set of works to create a wider direction. And partly because I'm curator in residence, and so my term is limited, and so there's a certain clarity to the boundaries of the work I'm doing with MPAC. It felt really clear immediately that whatever I was going to program needed to kind of hang together in some coherent way. So I've started thinking about some of the questions I'm also asking in my own research recently, in my writing and as well as in programming, and wanting to kind of explore what that would look like through this platform. And so those questions have a lot to do with dance, the body and movement, but also with how artists sort of grapple with history, archival materials, the technology of the body as a kind of archive, and really expansively thinking about the archive. And so I immediately sort of landed on a couple of projects that have now expanded into several. One of those is Leslie Sujet, who is a choreographer, who has a work called With Marion that looks back at sort of her family history and her understanding of her aunt's life and positioning and movement through the world and through a sort of Black American sort of middle class culture, but also her aunt was a ballerina, and so there's a sort of dance lineage that she's grappling with in her own family as a Black woman who that at a time her aunt was doing this at a time when it wasn't really common for Black women to be in ballet, and so she's like very working with projection, working with her own body and video, et cetera, to sort of think through some objects, work in relation to objects and images relating to her aunt. So there's a very clear relationship with the past, with a kind of lineage, family, and like actual archival materials, as well as like what video does in performance. And similarly, another project that has a very clear kind of dance connection that came to mind immediately was Catherine Simone Reynolds and AJ McLennan's collaboration, which the kitchen commissioned a few years ago during the pandemic, or right before the pandemic, and it kind of had to pivot and become video work that was online. And so we're going to be working with them to sort of spatialize that project, but it is, again, grappling with archival materials related to dance, specifically the kitchen's archives of Blondell Cummings, the work of Blondell Cummings, who's an important Black woman choreographer and video artist. So, it's like grappling with those larger themes has really helped me kind of shape the direction of the larger set of artists.
Nice. Thank you. I think for me, so this is now my second full season as curator of music here at MPAC, and I've been thinking about sort of artists' practice in general and taking the long view. And so I'm sort of taking different facets of artists' work who have been at MPAC before during my tenure, or are doing something different with different collaborators, and bringing them back to get a sort of more developed idea of their holistic practice. So, for instance, the pianist, curator, and composer Conrad Tao is returning this time with his long-term collaborator Charmaine Lee, Australian Cantonese vocalist and experimental composer. And they'll be doing a split set in September where they each perform a solo set and then perform together. And like I said, they've been doing this now for 8 years, so there's a connection between the two, and the music is charged, it's kinetic, it's extreme, and I actually think that if there is a kind of through line in the music this season, for me, it is this exploration of extremity and different poles. So the other concert performances are new work by Sarah Davachi, who works in a more sort of minimal, layered, sort of resonant space, very slow, I think would be the word I would use to describe her music. It develops very gradually over time. And a series of 2 concerts by cellist Charles Curtis. The first concert in Studio 2 is an hour-long piece by the French composer Éliane Radigue. And that is, I would say, a demanding piece for the listener, but one which ultimately rewards. It's very subtle. It's very not internal. It's really intimate, but it is really intense. The cello, the whole cello is retuned, so you have a sort of raspy, noisy texture for the entirety of the hour-long development of that piece. So, like Sarah's music, this music really develops gradually, slowly over time. And the second concert in that series, Charles will be performing in the concert hall, and will be performing a recent piece by composer Carolyn Chen, his own piece, Unfinished Song from 2008, and another Hadig piece, Occam 5, alongside some Renaissance music, actually, a little palette cleanser. And these pieces really take advantage. They're sort of small pieces insofar as that you really have to get into the details, and they reveal themselves over time. But something about the juxtaposition between the intimacy and smallness of this music with the resonant vastness, vast space, physical space, and of the concert hall. There's something about that juxtaposition and not so much contradiction, but just the dynamic between those two things that I found really compelling. Which, I mean, transition from that, having these two concerts in two different spaces by the same artist, something about MPAC is, the fact that we are a single building with 4 distinct venues. We have 2 studios, Studio 1 and Studio 2, Studio 2 being the smaller of the two, a theater and a concert hall. So, and each with their own unique properties, yet each equally acoustically tuned and equipped technologically with all manner of, technology, for lack of a better word. So I wanted to ask the both of you now to talk about how thinking about the spaces of MPAC's building, whether it's the venue or, in your case, Katherine, one of your performances takes place in the sort of interstitial areas of the building, the lobby spaces. But how were you thinking about space when you were planning or thinking about your season programming?
Yeah, great question. There's so many possibilities, as you were, hinting at, that MPAC's building has, both within each of the distinct venues and kind of thinking about the venues in relationship to each other, as you were saying, or even the kind of unofficial spaces, so that that the performance that you mentioned, which is Dana Michelle's Mike, will really kind of be a roaming durational performance. So she is going to start in Studio 1, kind of unassuming. There will be a sort of inventory of different objects that are almost sculptural in a way. And basically Dana sort of takes us through like a kind of movement score, kind of playful performance of working with and against these objects and with, in response to the audience. So it's actually a work that is always somewhat responsive to the architecture of the space, but Dana was especially excited by the sort of maybe working between the very sort of closed and pristine venue and then some of the more public spaces as well. So she's going to really kind of range through the building. And there's a couple of other projects too where simply by virtue of bringing them into MPAC, the work was kind of affected and has affected the artist's thinking. For example, the commission with Bassam Saad and Sanya Kostanik, that's a work that will be shown as a stage work. It's called Permanent Trespass, and it deals with kind of historical memory, with mediating kind of the long-term effects of, cultural violence, political violence. But actually, originally, the the texture and script of that work was quite literary. Sonia's an amazing writer. Bassem is a filmmaker, and they had together developed this very rich script. But actually, this version of the work will really be fleshed out into a kind of multimedia performance. So we'll be thinking about the elements of the script through projection, through spatial audio. But I think what was key in part of that translation was that this work, as it's going to be in Studio One, doesn't require there to be like a clear front to the project. It really lends itself to kind of showing a work like this that is in a way iterative, in the sense that it is kind of picking up on prior phases of the same work. And actually Permanent Trespass in parallel is being developed into a film. So there will be a lot of kind of with the artist, we'll be thinking about sort of the way that the film is actually being translated back into stage. And the relevance of that too is that originally Bassem and Sonia were thinking a lot about how conflict had kind of been televised, within their respective contexts. Court tribunals for the former Yugoslavia, for Lebanon, kind of being mediated in a specific way. So the flexibility of Studio One is really allowing them to bring in a lot of that into like a clear, like material, theatrical structure. And they say that they are now sort of thinking about the work as a kind of cine poem. So, something with the sensibilities maybe of a, something poetic, but of course that is actually cinematic ultimately. And there would be, there's much more to say about that too. I know Marina, for her project, is very excited by scale. So there's, I think with all projects, there's something special that the building can, kind of give them. And Tara, I'd love to hear also how you've been thinking about this too in your program.
Yeah, I have, I think actually every single project, residencies and sort of public-facing works alike over the course of the year has that kind of transitional aspect where MPAC is going to really influence the translation of the project to either a different form or sort of from one phase to another in its trajectory. The spaces, it's like a combination of the uniqueness of the spaces and the technology that they hold, and of course the like expert staff that comes with any MPAC project to sort of make things happen. But, one project is a work that's already premiered, it already exists, but because it was done in a very specific type of more gallery-like space, it really needs a place like MPAC to be the kind of next iteration where the artist can translate the shape of the work to a more theatrical setting that has like potentially everything that's needed already sort of in it, rather than having to build it from scratch and sort of just figuring out what is necessary to the piece versus what was a response to the space that it was originally done in. And I mentioned already the project that is bringing a series of video works, a video sort of multi-channel video project that was done digitally that's being brought into a space. So Studio One will be really pivotal, I think, through the whole series for some of those kinds of translations. What does it mean to think about what was a sort of flat online set of video works in a room, when you can kind of walk through it and have those pieces sort of exist simultaneously at, or in multiple scales, et cetera. And then also, even for like there's one earlier stage residency with Shawnee McElwain Holloway, which won't have a sort of big production at the end of it because the projects are sort of too early on in their process. But it's just an amazing, I think MPAC has this special capacity to hold even that more early stage work, first of all, but to support an artist as they figure out some of the technology that they're grappling with, and to do that in Studio One is a really special space. It's just the height of it, right? And the potential for working through ideas in there. Another thing about the series, which is the sort of the whole series that I'm creating, which is called Ephemeral Organ, is just that, there's some residencies, but there's also in the spring, in April, a small sort of 2-day festival, and with multiple things happening, talks and works as well. And I think that as I've been developing how these sort of multiple pieces will fit together in one, weekend's worth of time, the building has really centered in that, and, thinking about Studio One and the theater in particular as, like how all of the spaces as a kind of like the building is a body, right? So how do all of the spaces sort of operate as organs, right? And the word organ in the title of the series is, sort of referring to the organs in the body. It's also sort of referring to like how we organize and order systems, archives, et cetera. But there's something really interesting to me about MPAC's building and thinking about these multiple spaces, like how you move an audience through multiple spaces, through work that is of a set duration. You kind of show up, go in, sit there for an hour, or walk through it for an hour and then leave. And then work that is more installation based, that you can sort of spend as little or as much time as you want. Maybe it's punctuated with performance, but there's these different time frames within that space. So I think both works that are going to be presented in the spring have a sort of like, you can perambulate through them, but they have very different time frames that they're working with. So I think it's going to be really interesting to think about, the theater. It's such an expansive, big, beautiful space, but what happens when you use it, when audience is like viewing a work more standing on stage themselves, not just sitting in the audience and being still? What happens then when you close the curtain and there's a talk on the other side of that same stage, right? Or, we'll see exactly how it pans out. But those are the kinds of questions that the building has been inspiring. It's like, how can the concept of the series also sort of manifest in how we use the building?
Yeah, I mean, something to pick up. I just had a thought. Something to pick up on what both of you said was the fact that, for instance, Tara, you're ostensibly our dance and theater curator for the season, but you've just been talking a lot about installation. It's interesting for me as an audience, choreographing my own way through a spatial piece like an installation. I don't know. I mean, there are crossovers, and MPAC. We're known for being sort of interdisciplinary in that true sense, where actually the venues and the staff and the artists and the curators, we all kind of, because of the nature of projects and technologies we bring in and have, there's a lot of cross-pollination, some very sort of natural, organic cross-pollination, like you said, like some of this determined by the space themselves. And so this project you were talking about with AJ and Katherine, started off as a website, I think, right? And is now, exploding, as it were, into space, in three-dimensional space. And I know for me, although I'm, so Laurie Anderson, all know who Laurie Anderson is. She's, coming back to do a final residency before her new opera Arc premieres in Manchester in November. That's despite, Laurie being one of the true polymaths of our time, is a theater piece, maybe experimental music theater, but theater nonetheless, which is not necessarily a language I'm completely fluent in. I know Dana's piece, Mike, is kind of falls within dance and theater too. We have these titles: dance, theater, music, time-based visual arts, but maybe we can talk about how some of our projects kind of like cross over into each other's disciplines and purviews, I guess, is would be we all have some sort of disciplinary rigor attached to our research, our practice, our education. But I think what's exciting for me, having come here now almost 2 years ago, is that I get to learn not only from the curators, but from producing works that aren't necessarily, for me, purely music, for instance. So, maybe talk about, projects that are coming up in the fall, or recent projects where, not that you were out of your element per se, because I think we're all pretty, like I said, we all have this kind of rigor to our research and our practice, so we know what we're doing when we bring a project in. But maybe start with a specific project. It doesn't have to be Dana Michelle. You can talk about Dana Michelle, and you can talk about AJ and Katherine. I mean, you just did, Tara. But I know for instance, Shawnee Holloway. She's in music or in sound. She works a lot in sound and music. So there is this cross pollination, I was saying. So how does that feel?
Yes, great question. And this is actually one of the things I really one of many things I really enjoy about working with MPAC and the specific structure of the curatorial team and the porousness that we get to have between disciplines.
That's a good word.
If that's correct. Or so actually Dana's work is a great example of that. I'll just maybe briefly touch on it, but yes, that piece is very much like Dana is a choreographer, like she's a movement artist. But I was sort of interested in bringing that into my program because of actually the sort of there's undercurrents in it that are a little bit sculptural. And actually, interestingly, when I was working through the language with Dana for like our press announcements, she was interestingly kind of adamant about tweaking certain phrases to say that what I had kind of initially described as props were actually sort of partly sculptural objects. And that's not really a reading that her work necessarily explicitly invites, but is this kind of interesting undercurrent and kind of reaches back and gestures back to kind of a sort of historical relationship between sculpture and theatrical projects. So Dana's for sure is something that very much strays into the kind of dance realm. Let's see. And actually Marina Rosenfeld's in some way is also a little bit kind of on the boundary between visual art and music and sound. And in fact, Marina herself, too, is actually kind of, for a long time, was really known primarily as a composer. She also has a really robust visual art practice, but sort of what was bridging those parts of her practice was thinking about kind of the relational aspects of music making, of listening, and sound in general. So she has developed a really interesting kind of sculptural and installation-oriented approach to sound in many of her works. But for that one, that's definitely, music is, of all our disciplines, that's kind of the area I'm least versed in. So I've been learning a lot about some of the technical sides of the sound work she's doing. And one interesting thing with that project is that she's working with a kind of special piano, transacoustic piano that will resonate whatever you put into it, even if it's not like an acoustic sound, you can kind of hook it up to digital sounds. So that will be part of the work, but then it's also going to be very visual, and there will be a significant video component and kind of even a little bit of like more kind of just sort of straight time-based arts in the sense of installation-based work. So that's another example, and just something that is like really perfectly enabled by MPAC spaces too.
Oh, sorry.
Oh no, I was just gonna ask you what you thought.
Yeah, we're in such a good like pattern of going.
Yeah, right. I was gonna try to
Yeah,
interject
we
and
can
mix it up a
loosen
little
it
bit.
up.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. In fact, Amadeus, would you like to? Should we switch it up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was just gonna say,
now.
with Marina and Shawnee, sound is such a integral component, and I should say, MPAC was sort of designed and developed by a musician, composer, acoustician, Johannes Goebel, and a lot of these spaces are sort of acoustically tuned for, human scale listening and working. So I feel like there's a slight, sound, music, acoustic bias here. So, but no, I mean, all this to say is, with this sort of interaction between disciplines, bringing in Marina, for instance, I was like kind of unfamiliar with a lot of her work, in the visual arts realm. Knew she was a musician and composer, but also, with that aspect of her work, it really informs what she's doing with music and sound in a different way than, say, I would think about music and sound. And so I'm just learning a lot about the technology, as are the artists. I think it's, what's cool is a lot of the time the staff learns more about themselves and the building. And so that sort of translates into sort of helping other artists when they come in. It's like, I have a residency downstairs right now in the theater, and they're using the line sets of the theater in a way that they've never used them before, and the staff is learning how to do that. So what am I trying to say? I'm trying to say that I'm part of the interdisciplinariness of working at MPAC, of Katherine, you bringing in someone ostensibly in my world, is that it's actually it sheds light on a different aspect and facet of music and sound that I may not necessarily bring to the table. And the same is true of your projects, Tara. I'm excited to see what kind of sounds come out of out of the artists that you're bringing in the projects that are coming up.
Yeah, it's just super exciting to me to be able to be in a space like making this platform happen in a space where there's a really like even balance and exchange across the disciplines. I feel like I've worked in spaces previously that are more focused in one direction or another, and either I'm like inside of that, in the pocket of that, or I'm like the one doing the weird performance stuff in the corner, amidst a different context. And so despite the different ways that our fields work, or the sort of terrains that the artists we're working with like operate in and have these weird disciplinary boundaries across them, like the reality is so many artists are working across disciplines, and so like as curators we have to too, so it's just been really refreshing to be able to be in a kind of equal exchange with you all, and to every time I'm like, oh my God, I have to talk to someone on staff or whoever, like there's going to be this thing that's going to be crazy, it's going to be totally different than what they're expecting this dance performance to be, and then it's actually totally fine. So I have this like carried over stress about the disciplinary boundaries, and so from previous situations. So I think it's just been really beautiful. And like we mentioned Shawnee multiple times, that project is one, like she has performance work and she's done performance work in the past, but she's really more known for kind of new media and expanded cinema work and some sculpture work and sound, that's part of those types of projects. And so I think, on the one hand, it's beautiful to be able to, like, I think it's going to be great for her to be able to work with a dance like centered curator, to be able to really just dig into some of the relationship with the body of the performers that she's working with in that residency. But it's also focused on like a particular trigger technology that she wants to work through, and how the body and gesture and movement through that technology can like interface with video and sculpture and lights, et cetera. So there's a real all the projects really do ground in body and choreography and movement in some way. But even for a project like that, that's so focused on certain sort of media and technology aspects and object aspects, there's something really beautiful about just the synergy that's going to be possible because of MPAC being supportive of these different disciplines and the blurs between them so clearly. I personally am like, nervous about the fact that I've never done a video shoot, and I'm working with Stephanie Jemison on a video shoot, which will be my first time. And I'm like, what a tall order to work with like a really amazing, performance / video / installation artist on like my first video shoot type sort of based project. So there's things like that where, Stephanie's work, I think, is really, there's a really firm grounding in like what the performer's body is doing and how that drives, a large amount of her work. And she thinks through, so carefully histories of dance, histories of performance art, all, and examples of that don't necessarily come from the disciplines. Also, like she works a lot with stories, sort of past events that are not strictly like inside of art history or dance history or performance history or anything. She draws on different historical moments to make work and think through how the body of the performers or the movers in the video or in the live event like interface with those past historical moments, but not, it's not strictly inside of a kind of dance discipline or whatever. But she's so well versed in making video installation, like that's, something she's really known for. And so I think it'll be really amazing to learn from her and with her and alongside her as she figures out that project. I think, yeah, you mentioned already Kat and AJ, and AJ is also a very interdisciplinary. I mean, they're both very interdisciplinary, but AJ is a sound artist as well, and so there will be sound for you, I promise, in that installation too, which will be great. Yeah, I think, and like we had a meeting a week ago, I think, with the tech folks, the production folks, and they, those artists were just like, this is great. Like everything you're saying is great. Like there's just such sort of generous responsiveness to those kinds of projects that have, a sort of multivalent structure to them. So it's super exciting. I can't wait.
Yeah, I will say I did my first video shoot last season with M. Lamar and the Living Earth show, and I have another video shoot coming up in 2 weeks. I am way out of my element on a set, but I will tell you that I have so much fun. I know you Katherine, you just did a video shoot. I think that's also a big part of what we do here, whether we want to name it or not, is we do a lot of play, There's and I think that's where the discovery and the experimentation come in, and the staff and the venues really facilitate that sense of exploration. So I mean, I'm having fun. I do feel a little bit out of my element every time I venture into Catherine Adams's territory. and I've talked to you, Tara, about how I feel like I know nothing about dance. but I'm surprised about how much I do know just intuitively about these things, and to follow that intuition. But I mean, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's like, it can be really helpful to artists to be working on one thing and have the support of a curator who has expertise in another area that may not be their forte either, so it's all really productive. Like I feel like that with Shawnee, it's like to have an artist working with a curator whose expertise is maybe more centered in a place that the artist is trying to explore anew,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, speaking of that, how is developing, these projects and bringing these projects in really sort of maybe shaped or changed the way you think about your own discipline, maybe having some feedback from other disciplines or learning alongside artists and, our staff about maybe growing your thought and your research or your practice around and in your discipline.
Yeah, shall I kick off? Okay, cool. Yeah, it's this is something I'm glad you brought up also the film video, because that's also actually been an area where I'm kind of expanding my knowledge at MPAC. And to that question, I think time-based visual arts here, it's actually like all of the disciplines at MPAC, it's very expansive. And I almost feel sometimes it includes sort of two fields. Like there's time-based visual arts, which, if you're looking at like visual arts as a field, that has a sort of kind of genre of presenting work. Like, oftentimes curators work in an exhibition format. Installations are very common. And then film video, of course, like, historically, it's typically in like a theatrical environment. So one of the amazing things for me has been kind of working in both of those modes. And there's, of course, a ton of crossover, especially when you're creating a work. The presentation can diverge, but for sure, I think that just like having the chance to work with artists creating new video, new film work has been really incredible and has been kind of expanding my thinking about things that for me were sort of, I didn't, have as much direct involvement in. And it is kind of rare for visual arts curators to be able to be so closely involved in video production to such an extent. So that's been fantastic for me. And has also shaped my thinking around kind of like the moving image more broadly. And the one other thing I would say too is I think because MPAC's is really like, I find that it has this very theatrical architecture, theatrical infrastructure. It's also, I think a lot about like liveness, about like the events embedded in work that may even still appear to be kind of reducible to something kind of static, that there's actually, there's ways of thinking about how that meets viewers, or the ways in which kind of the performance involved in creating that work, say a film, actually kind of marks it later on. So there's been a lot for sure with MPAC in terms of for me kind of field discovery, so to speak. Do you want to speak a little?
Sure. I mean, just really quickly. I mean, I think that, every single musician, composer I've brought in so far is just, and I think this is true for all of our artists, are just kind of like floored and somewhat overwhelmed by the space and the opportunity. I know for myself in my own practice as a composer, there is a kind of, 90% of us are DIY, and it's, it engenders a kind of scarcity mindset, which is unfortunate, but, a lot of creativity and a lot of good work comes from that mindset. But when you're here, you have the capacity to expand and fill the space, and just allowing that, and, giving that to artists and develop work in that way has helped me think about the possibilities of expanding what is music, what is sound, to fill, like you said, a sort of a theatrical space. Actually, there's something actually inherent about musical performance, or inherently theatrical about musical performance, that is hard to get in a, auto body shop or a small dive bar. You take that same performance and you put it in our theater, or you put it on the concert hall stage, or you put it in Studio One, and it's like a different thing. It's completely different. And so, I knew that space was important. I knew that where the physical context of a performance was important, but there's something about these spaces at MPAC that really reinforced that idea to me, that like, oh, music performance can expand to fill the context, and allowing artists, inviting them from a DIY space into MPAC, facilitates and really transforms the same performance, or a similar kind of performance.
Yeah, I think I think that since 2020, a lot more dance artists have been thinking in more complex ways about video. And I think prior to that, of course, there have been video artists working with choreography and vice versa, and all of that. But it just took such a foregrounded role in the field, and really raised for a lot of artists like questions about liveness and documentation, and the sort of the differences between documentation versus like live streaming versus video art, or these different ways that the same bodies in motion for dance artists might sort of appear on screen and have different relationships with the artist through how the video is existing. And so I think that's been a sort of fascination of mine, both because I'm doing archival research where I look back at old video and think about the relationships artists are having with video at different time periods, but also the way that every artist in this series is working with video in some way, right? And that's no accident. I mean, some of the artists are certainly coming out of a time-based visual art sort of focused career, and some are like Leslie Sujet is very much coming out of choreography and dance, but she's working with live performance, and there's multiple projection situations going on in the space, to create the thing she wants to make, to multiply her body, to make small objects that she's working with visible in a different way, to work with archival materials, sort of have a charismatic presence in the space as she performs, et cetera, et cetera. So, and then with Katherine and AJ, that relationship, the video pieces are the work thus far, right? But it's in expanding it to a spatial situation inside of Studio One, it really is going to bring the audience's bodies into relation with the video in a very different way than it was before on a screen, on a website. But also they're planning to do some small sort of activations with their own, as performers. So there will be really multiple valence that you'll see the performer that's also on screen, right? So I think I'm just so fascinated by how video has become so central to, and it's sort of unexpected for me that video has become so central to not only what the artists are interested in, the artists I'm interested in, what they're interested in, but also that I'm fascinated by that, And so every project, there's an artist making a video work. There's artists who have the video work, but they're retooling how it shows up in front of an audience. And there's artists. So there's just, I think, so many different facets there that are opening up vistas, for lack of a better way of thinking about it. It's sort of corny, but yeah, it just feels like it's expanding what dance is, and what what liveness and presence, these things that in performance we're so obsessed with, or historically that's been such the discourse. And I really do believe there's ways to work with video that are, not buying into this sort of dualism of live versus pre-recorded or something, that really excites me.
I think this is a good place to wrap. I just wanted to ask each of you, um, we've all sort of talked about, our projects and maybe a little bit, we're getting a little excited. So I just wanted to ask you each, like, what are you most looking forward to in the upcoming season? Doesn't have to be a particular project. It could be a vibe. It can be, an approach. It can be, it can be anything. I just, want to get a sense of how we're feeling going into fall.
I can say one thing very quickly, which is just I'm excited for like the dinner party where I finally get all these artists together to talk to each other, or like whatever that gathering looks like.
Yeah.
I just feel like it's going to be the best conversation. I've been having individual conversations with every single one of them, in many cases over multiple years, and so, like, personally, it's exciting to just be like, oh my God, I can have those separate conversations all at once. But I think there's also going to be really beautiful confluence across all of them. I mean, some of them know each other already and all that, but there's like, they are excited to like be in one place together and connect and, have the frame of the series as a touch point to start from and, hopefully produce some beautiful, like, transcribed, conversation that can be published somewhere or whatever, but also just to make those personal connections and that are like over a meal and also like creative, aesthetically grounded conversation as well.
Yeah, I love that. For me, I guess, well, there's a few things I could mention, but I think the one that stands out is, so these will be my first commissioned projects. So I've been working with Marina for a while, but yeah, I think the premiere of two kind of larger scale, like longer term kind of projects that I've been working on, and also just like the sort of like breakthrough moments once artists like come, especially those who haven't been able to do like a site visit, comes like get to really be in the space and let that affect the work. Yeah, and so yeah, I'd say that's it for me. Maybe just to plug one more quickly project, in that vein. So Charlene Bamboat is another artist coming, and she's really been like totally reworking like an existing film into an installation. And I have a feeling like when she gets on site, it'll be so much easier for her to make decisions. She'll be kind of in the space, like, there's like a kind of immersion that really like just kind of can put things into gear, I think, sometimes for artists. So I'm very excited about that as well.
Great.
Yeah.
I mean, oftentimes what I feel like I do is I curate artists and people, their personalities, how they approach their work, rather than the work itself. And so even if it's a new artist who I'm a fan of or whose work I admire, and I think we all do this, we meet with them, we have coffee with them, we share a meal with them, we get to know them. And then they come in and do the work and we have that rapport with them so that we can help facilitate, the best work that they can do while they're here at MPAC. Like you were saying, Tara, I mean, for me, like the personal back and forth and the personal connection, what I call the hang, is what I often always look forward to in a new season. Whether it's someone who's coming back to develop a project or a new artist who I've never really spent a whole lot of time with, but I'm excited to work with. These exchanges between me, between you both, between the artist, with the staff. I'm kind of jealous, Tara, that you have, all these artists in this sort of festival setting and you all get to talk to each other. I should really, that's a good, I've been talking about the hang with individual artists. Maybe I should really just curate a party.
Yeah.
Invite all my favorite artists to do a festival. Awesome. Maybe we can do an interdisciplinary party.
Yeah, I'm for that. I'm really
But yeah, I think for me it's all about the exchange and the sort of personal connection. So
yeah, it feels like if like my goal, I think secretly, aside from all the fancy, like rigorous sort of, you know, thoughtful curatorial framing and all that labor that, that type of stuff. My goal is always like if like one artist or two artists that have some kind of interaction, like stay connected and they weren't connected before, or like they encounter something new that then like influences how they move forward. Like if I can see the evidence of the thing I programmed somehow in their, future, I'm like, done, did it. Like whether the project worked or not, the one that we actually made together, whether it like went well or not, like if they met someone that like became a collaborator or like influenced them in some way, or if they like developed an aspect of their practice that then is like, becomes important to them later that wasn't before, like that's like the dream. That's so I feel like I just want to try to set up scenarios where that can happen occasionally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, I want to thank you, Katherine and Tara, for the conversation today. And folks can find our fall 2024 season online at impact.rpi.edu. And we look forward to the fall and to having folks hopefully join us for what will be a really exciting series of events. So thank you both.
Thanks, Amadeus.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. In Production is produced by the audio, video, and curatorial teams here at Impact. Both a Center for Media and the Performing Arts and a research and production facility, MPAC at Rensselaer hosts artists and residents year-round to support the realization of complex artworks and research projects at any stage from inception to completion. To find out more about MPAC, visit www.mpac.rpi.edu and our Instagram account at EMPAC_RPI. All opinions expressed here belong solely to those featured in this episode and are not representative of Rensselaer.